Hello and welcome. My name is Karen Menti, Outreach Librarian at UAGC. I will be the host of this session, Visual Connection, How Faces and Representation in a Virtual Classroom Can Help a Diverse Student Body Thrive in an Open Access Future. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with the TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we do encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we've enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to our presenter, Oreste Prada, a project manager and trainer with UAGC and an instructor for the University of California, San Diego Extension. Welcome, Oreste.
Thank you so much, Karen. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. As Karen mentioned, my name is Oreste Prada. I am with UAGC and have been an instructor for almost 2 decades with University of California, San Diego. And today I'm going to be speaking to you about the importance of visually connecting with each other, especially in our online forums, and specifically on the importance of just using faces in a lot of our materials as a way of fostering that connection. A little bit about me. My work in University of California Extension really focused on photography. I helped them develop their digital lab when we were moving from analog to digital photography. And then I developed a number of courses for them and helped them revamp their programs. When I began with them, classes were pretty much exclusively in person. And so I was also part of that process of taking us into hybrid courses and then into online and to asynchronous online courses as well. I have also worked for a number of years studying at 2 schools in India. The Krishnamacharya Healing Yoga Foundation is the one where I've spent most of my time. And I've also studied at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. I'm particularly focused on yoga therapy, but also very interested in how the way that we learn, the way that we connect with one another, especially within an educational setting, actually helps us focus more and helps us learn more, helps us make stronger connections and bonds. And then I also worked as a product and program manager for the better part of 20 years with Hewlett-Packard. And over the last 10 or so years, worked with them in software development, specifically in developing apps and online experiences for user onboarding. And so all of this work, which looks very, very separate, actually really blends together my passions around technology and specifically how advances in technology, in particular over the last 20 years, have changed us fundamentally. The problems that these changes have created, but then also the innovations that they enable in us, and the adaptations that they demand in order for us to continue to innovate and be healthy within them. But primarily, and in terms of the focus of this particular presentation, I'm very interested in how, within the context of all of these technological changes, how it is that we maintain connection to one another, very real human connection and autonomy, right? Because it's very easy for us to let our devices guide how it is that we behave and the habits that we create. We want to be able to guide our own path and be autonomous in the decisions that we make about how it is that we learn and interact. For those of you who attended my lecture yesterday, some of these slides are going to be familiar, and it's because the same problems that we have in the context of connection when it comes to representation and to faces very much applies to what I was speaking about in the previous presentation. You know, in today's world, mobile devices are ubiquitous with modern life. And if we look at statistics in terms of their usage, the Pew Research Center did a survey in 2021 that spanned into 2022. And it broke down by demographics, smartphone usage, and social media usage. And we can see here that for 18 to 49-year-olds, we're really looking at almost 100% usage within the United States of smartphones. And then if we're looking at social media use, more than 80% of each of those groups actually self-reports using social media in one way or another. So they may use Twitter, or X, they may use Facebook, or they may use Instagram, they may use multiples of these, but they definitely are online and connected to others via social media in some respect. Within this group, what's really interesting is almost 50%, especially of 18 to 29-year-olds, report being online pretty much all the time, right? And even for 30 to 49-year-olds, it's more than 40% are self-reporting that they are online all of the time. And so I have this lovely quote on the left that I pulled from some of the research that I have been doing in these areas, that really points to the fact that the students that we have today, and they often span across this 18 to 49 range, can be assumed to be digital locals. These are folks who grew up or have spent the better part of 20 years very familiar with smartphones or computers, very aware of how it is that you use them and how it is to connect with them. It is part of their daily life. We, of course, have a problem, though. We are very, very connected online. We have access to information very, very easily, but we're also seeing signs that we are much more disconnected from each other. And especially whenever we interact online, oftentimes there is a higher inclination towards bullying and trolling, and of course, disconnection and extremism in terms of our own ideologies and our ideas about other people. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that when we interface with these online services and systems and apps, oftentimes we're immersed in text and in graphics, and we're actually not interfacing with another person most of the time. And even when we are communicating with someone else, it is often through text only. It isn't through video. We cannot see their faces. This is not something that's new. This isn't something that I've come to determine uniquely. Many companies have come to realize that there is a lot of power in terms of being able to see one another or being able to see faces in general. And so we have seen that many apps, including rewards apps for the likes of coffee companies like Starbucks, are asking folks to upload profile photos. And for something like a reward app, it's not really necessary for you to upload a profile photo. You're really the only one who's looking at it. But whenever you go into your app, you see your own face. You're connecting with a face. And because you recognize that face, you feel ownership of everything that is involved within that app. Companies that don't use profile photos often also use avatars instead, or will have characters. I'm showing Lily here from Duolingo, who again is another face that someone can interface with. Now, the thing to note is that we have all of these companies that are using these techniques of helping us to connect with other faces, but oftentimes it's in the context of advancing their own, personal interests, which have to do with advertising and product placement. And many times, these opportunities for us to connect with a face are coming with ideas about how it is that we should look, what it is that we should wear, what our lives should look like in general. The photos that we see or the characters that we come across will often embody some of these things that we may want to go after. They're not really focused on us trying to create genuine connection that is not trying to sell us something. Visual connection and trust are really related to one another. Right. So if we think to our own interactions with people in the real world, oftentimes if we can't see their eyes, if their eyes are covered by sunglasses, there's something that seems evasive about that. So oftentimes we kind of yearn to see someone's eyes to be able to connect with them. If they're averting their eyes, often we feel like they're trying to conceal something. And so this visual connection is about trust and accountability for us. And that is true in the real world. And it is absolutely true when we're connected online, where we have access to tons of information, so much more than we ever did before. Some of this information is reliable, some of it not so much. Some of it is decontextualized. So even though it may be true, the messages it sends may actually be misleading. And some of it is absolutely deliberately misleading. And so we need to find a way where we can, or how we can discern what it is that we connect with and what it is that we trust. Within education, this is very important because oftentimes we have a setting where a particular instructor or a group of instructors is relaying information. And so that connection to the student is critical because the student needs to know that they can trust the information that they're receiving. This also allows students to connect with teachers in a way that is a bit more personal and that allows them to see teachers as mentors or as guides and potentially even as inspirations for what they themselves might be capable of within the same field. If you doubt that faces are really important, that's reasonable, right? Giving them so much weight seems like a bit of a stretch, but the fact is faces are absolutely critical in our interactions with the world, right? We're wired to identify faces. Parents will tell you that one of the first things that they try to do with babies before they're able to walk is to get them to smile. So there's some communication going on just through faces. They'll make faces to the baby so that the baby can react to them. Faces allow us, of course, to know who is familiar to us and who is not. And many of us are so wired to react and recognize faces that oftentimes when we can't remember names, we still will remember somebody's face. We may not know where we met them. We may not know what their name was, how they introduced themselves, but we absolutely know that we know this person somehow. And of course, faces allow us also to recognize what is like us, even in non-humans, right? In animals and even in pictures, we can very quickly pick up what looks like a face. Even the fronts of some vehicles, oftentimes we can discern faces where there are none. And I love this photo of this panda that looks to be smiling and waving because that's how we interpret it. That's how important it is for us to look at a face and read an expression. And I am a longtime member of the San Diego Zoo and have had many discussions about fundraising with folks who work there. And I always remembered one of the things they told me was it was very easy to raise money for animals that we deemed cute and that had faces, right, where the eyes were forward looking because we seemed to connect with them. Whereas we had many, many animals that were very important to ecosystems and perhaps even more so than many of the animals that we considered cute. But they had trouble raising money for them because we just didn't connect with them as much. Faces, of course, allow us to read intention. They allow us to communicate sometimes without even saying a word. And I bring up this National Geographic cover from June 1985 of the Afghan girl, which has really become an iconic image and come to define National Geographic. And it was partly because it was so intense, because you had someone looking at you and you could read so much about that person without knowing anything about them. Right? So faces relate to us whether we're being attentive or whether we are avoiding whoever it is that is looking at us. When we're trying to ignore someone, we look away. And we certainly can feel when somebody is trying to avoid us because we can see that they're averting their gaze. We can also see if someone is alert or unaware, if they're kind of lost deeply in their own thought, or if they are aware of all of their surroundings. And we can use our eyes to actually point. And certainly when we're in public circumstances where it might be rude to point, if you want your friends to look in a particular direction, oftentimes just with your eyes, you can help guide them. Of course, faces allow us to read emotion, whether we're excited, whether we're happy or angry. And certainly if we feel safe within a particular circumstance, or if we feel that there might be a sense of danger. And within education, it's important because there is a lot of this same communication across all of these different categories happening between a teacher and a student. Students can read whether a teacher is excited about the material, whether they're being attentive to the class, or whether they're just kind of going through the motions. And certainly teachers can read the same about students, whether they feel engaged, whether the material is really being brought in, whether they're confused. Additionally, there is a sense of connection between students and teachers that can happen just by reading each other's faces. And that connection is important because it makes someone much more open to the material that is being relayed. And then lastly, there is this important element of representation. So when we see someone's face, we can discern whether they are more like us or less like us. And whenever we see someone that we have something in common with, they also come to represent our potential within a field. And I have had many instructors, I happen to be from the Caribbean, and I have had many instructors who were Hispanic and who I resonated with the moment that I went to some of my science and engineering courses. There was something that just made me a little bit more excited about seeing someone who had experiences like me, or who I read as having experiences like me, because it meant that I could get there too. Seeing each other absolutely matters, and I love to use these two examples of people who have been deeply influential in my life. Professor Rupal is a Sanskrit scholar who, among many distinctions, along with being an international lecturer at schools like Cornell and Oxford, also managed to teach me Sanskrit and Devanagari, which was not a very easy thing. I had been trying to learn with different instructors for the better part of 12 years. A lot of my work in India required that I know a little bit of Sanskrit, and I was always having trouble with it. 10 months with Professor Rupal across 3 classes, and I suddenly understood Sanskrit grammar. And it's deeply personal for me to be able to do that. And I'm ever so thankful that I was able to achieve that. Professor Ramon was my sponsor when I did my master's in computational fluid dynamics. And specifically, I went to Carnegie Mellon seeking out Professor Ramon because the material that was coming out of Amon's classes and research was unparalleled anywhere else in the United States. And I really wanted to learn from the best. This is what Professor Rupal and Professor Amon look like. And it's important for us to see what they look like, because it's easy enough for us to see them as names and as achievements tied to those names. But seeing their faces is something altogether even more powerful, because the names alone give us a certain idea of who these people might be, what their lives may have been like, who they are, where they come from, oftentimes their gender. And the fact is, the person who is relaying information to us is a complete person who has had challenges like many of us, and who actually becomes a far more powerful instructor as a result of those challenges. Being able to connect is very, very important. As I've mentioned, it relays trust, it creates trust. And through it actually relays the approachability between two people, perhaps even affection, certainly accessibility and familiarity, as well as potential inspiration. And so I'm including here 4 people who have done amazing work. Ananda is a person who I had the honor of meeting in India, and who has done amazing work in India, trying to tie yoga therapy to some of the medical interventions so that there is more of an exchange between East and West. And Guo Jiamei, who has done amazing work in China to help underrepresented Marcela Torres, who has done brilliant work in trying to teach migrants who are fleeing violent situations in their own countries to code. So essentially trying to teach them skills that are going to make them successful in their new home countries, and specifically teaching them skills that are in high demand. So how is it that we can actually make use of this idea of connection in faces? One is really simple, right? By just visual presence, keeping the camera on. It lets students read instructor expressions. It allows connection through eye contact, and it also relays emotional cues about the material. Of course, many of us have asynchronous classes and are not actually delivering the lectures, but the fact is that connection happens even through pre-recorded video. And you can think of when we watch movies that we get emotionally involved in many of the characters. These connections happen. They don't have to be a live feed. Certainly when we are live, or even when we are recording, we want to be attentive to our own visual cues, how alert we are, how excited we are, if we're relating excitement at the right places, and what our intention is, which absolutely somebody can read in our faces. Is our intention for others to learn? Is our intention to try to inspire? Is our intention to try to relay a sense of comfort and accessibility to the material? And certainly it allows us as instructors to be seen as individuals, and potentially even as role models and guides and mentors, which we may certainly be for many students during their journey. I do want to mention here the area of student cameras, which I know can be a little bit controversial and has gotten a lot of talk online. We always want to be sensitive to students, especially when we are dealing with online education, where students might be anywhere in the world. They may be sitting in a dark room with family sleeping behind them, and so they may not be able to turn on their camera without violating privacy. But certainly whenever possible, having students be on camera absolutely fosters that same kind of connection in the other direction from teacher to the student, and then also between students.
You got 10 minutes left.
Thank you. For those of us who are teaching material that is actually collected from many different sources, we actually have even more opportunities. So if classes such as in the app data camp and the service data camp, material is coming from a lot of different recordings by different instructors, we have the opportunity to actually highlight a number of different faces, which is really lovely because it promotes this sense of collected knowledge, but even more importantly, it allows students the opportunity to connect with someone that represents them, right? So oftentimes in a class, we may have just one lead instructor. You know, that lead instructor has their own life, has their own experience. Classes actually just multiplies the number of students that we can reach in these subtle ways. I have made use of guest lecturers at UCSD. It's something that some of us really enjoy doing. And oftentimes I would go out of my way to choose a guest lecturer who was very different from me so that students who didn't look like me, who weren't able to connect with me in that way, could have someone that represented them. And then certainly whenever I was pulling material from other instructors or from researchers or from photographers, I would, as often as possible, try to include a bio on that person that included a photo so that my students got to know that person in a much more intimate way than just through their work. One of the benefits that was not intended, but it was absolutely brilliant for us at UCSD whenever we were pulling material from different instructors, is that where we had instructor turnover, and we certainly did here and there, it didn't feel awkward to have one lead instructor offering material that was solely recorded by a different one. The fact that we had all these different voices made the material that sense of multiple voices something that was built in by design. One of the other benefits was that oftentimes students would see a recording by an instructor who was not the lead instructor, and something would resonate, and they would actually seek out electives with that instructor. So that was how powerful it was, that they could just make a connection across a single lecture and feel like, oh, I actually want to meet that person or study with that person directly. And then certainly including with citations, with quotes, photos and bios on the folks that you are highlighting. So whenever there's contribution by experts and known figures, really important for us to include their faces. And here, of course, I have Jeff Bezos and Meredith Whittaker, who is an absolutely brilliant mind, especially in the areas around AI and online ethics. And then Jane Addams, who was one of the earliest contributors to the mix of criminology and sociology. When you offer reading materials to students, certainly include photos of authors and subjects whenever possible so that students can connect to who it is they're reading or who it is that they are reading about. And then, of course, this gives us a great opportunity for diversity and for representation within our classes through our materials, whether they're pre-recorded lectures, whether they're videos, whether they are written articles. It gives students an opportunity to see themselves, and it's also a beautiful self-check on us on the kind of community that we are creating, on who we are including within our classes, within our materials, and who we are excluding. So today we face new challenges and new approaches given our circumstances. We are very steadily moving towards an open access world, which is a little bit scary to many, but is also very, very exciting to most of us. And so this reinforcement of connection becomes really important because we are pulling material from many, many different sources, and it opens us up to use that material in ways that relays connection, much needed connection with our students. And of course, between our students as well. And again, I mentioned, open access also gives us a sense of collective instruction by being able, not being locked down to one particular textbook, as was the old model of education, but actually being able to go out and pull relevant material from a variety of different sources, from authors who have had very, very different life experiences and who may have very different perspectives on the material itself. Including photos with our materials, of course, is always going to humanize the content. And the moment it becomes more human, it has a story, and we are much, much better at remembering stories than we are just remembering raw facts and data. And lastly, of course, seeing each other matters. It absolutely matters. And as we are moving towards this world where we are interfacing with our phones and with our computers all of the time, we always want to maintain this human connection. We want to bring it into the systems that we are using to communicate as much as possible so we don't lose that human connection. Oops. So to close, I actually wanted to, I'm going to get emotional. I wanted to share with you the faces of my teachers. So these folks have either formally or informally taught me so much. And every time I see these faces, I actually see what they taught me, whether it was Sanskrit, whether it was how to use old yoga techniques as therapy, whether it was how to write Devanagari, whether it was how to be a good journalist, or fluid dynamics or science and physics, right? These folks, or just kind of how to live life, how to approach life in a way that was ethical and that would contribute beautifully to the world. And that is it.